Hello everybody, this is a Maserati 3200 GT. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you may have noticed that I've already reviewed a silver Maserati 3200 GT, but there are some key differences with this one. This is a 3200 GT Assetto Corsa in manual. The Assetto Corsa was a special edition of the 3200 GT. If you were going to criticise the car that I drove before, you could say that it didn't really know quite what it wanted to be. It sat in the awkward space between GT and sports car, being a little sharper than a contemporary Jaguar, but nowhere near as sharp as, say, a 911. I did enjoy the car though, however, with the automatic gearbox of that one, I wasn't really able to properly assess the engine's legendarily spiky characteristics. Some of the key differences to the Assetto Corsa include the fact that it is a limited edition, so you get that most important of all things, a plaque, proudly stating that this is, in this particular car's case, one of 75, presumably for the UK market, because it says Maserati UK. Worldwide, they made 259 of these. They are available in 3 colours, this one being Grigio Touring. They've got better cooling for the brakes, a quicker steering rack, specific tuning for the dampers, and lower springs. The idea is that this is supposed to be a sharper, meaner car. However, there are no claim changes to either the power output, 370 horsepower, 360 pound-foot of torque, or the weight, which is just over 1,600 kilos. The way I'm going to be looking at this particular car is as a budget alternative to a Ferrari. And realistically, I think you'd be looking at something like either a 456 or a 550. I've been very fortunate to spend the last few months with a 550, and I've also previously driven the 456. Compared to either of those cars, this really is a bargain, and in many ways it shares some pretty clear DNA. For example, the entire steering column appears to be identical to that in my 550. Steering wheel's the same, indicators are the same, steering column has the same weird rubberized finish to it. The pedals, also specific to the Assetto Corsa, look distinctly Ferrari-ish. And the rest of the interior is pretty damn good too. The Assetto Corsa gets red piping, which lifts the otherwise monotone interior that this particular car has, and it's Connolly leather everywhere. It really does feel like a genuinely special thing to be in. The engine is the last of line for the Maserati bi-turbo. Interestingly, the first production bi-turbo power plant. I didn't know that previously. I also didn't know Maserati were apparently the first people to produce an engine with 3 valves per cylinder, and they even made a prototype with 6 valves per cylinder, which is nice. At normal speeds, the ride is actually pretty decent. I accept that it's a little firm, a little jittery at low speeds around town on poor surfaces, but then so is it in the 550. I actually expected it to be an awful lot worse. I don't believe this car has officially what they called Skyhook, but it's got, I think, a variation of it. There is a sport button down here, which I may be tempted to press a little bit later on. Plenty of other touch points also will be familiar to anybody that's had a Ferrari of the period, including the electric seat controls down here. Now, they're not quite as grippy as those in most Ferraris, but they're comfortable enough. Visibility is very good in here, with even the rear 3/4 not actually being that compromised. Very impressive, and the overall packaging of the car has to be commended. What does take some getting used to is the pedal setup. That's fairly normal, you know, clutch on the left, accelerator on the right, and brake somewhere between them. But the weighting is all a little bit odd, much lighter than you'd find in a Ferrari, and in this particular car, I can see what people meant when they talked about the throttle pedal in this being a little bit more like a switch. It seems like almost everything happens in the first sort of half an inch of travel. And it's very odd because the car will lurch forward and then not really give you that much more. There's no real reward for them pressing the thing all the way. Luckily, the other controls are a little nicer to use, particularly the brakes, which have plenty of feel and are nicely progressive, and the gearbox, which has a really nice direct short action and is a very, very entertaining thing to use. If you've done your research on 3200 GTs, you may have seen rumours that it was something to do with the manual gearbox that caused a lot of engine failures in these cars. I suspect the reality is that now, with all this time having passed, you probably wouldn't need to worry about that too much, especially if you buy a car with a few miles on it, because chances are any big problems would have likely already happened. The key test of this car is this road right here, because with this being the much more overtly sporting 3200 GT, it really does need to impress here more than anywhere else. Let's engage that sport mode, shall we? The steering is bizarre. There's a moment, and I mean quite a big moment of delay between me turning the wheel and the rest of the car responding. But when it does respond, it's so obscenely keen. It's actually a little bit too much. There's no lacking for pace, and the car is considerably narrower than either a 456 or a 550. Makes nice noises too. This one's on a standard exhaust system, and it's pleasingly mechanical. You certainly can hustle it. And the suspension, it's frustrating, because I know it's almost certainly the suspension that's responsible for this lack of keenness on the steering input. But it actually does ride pretty well. This is a bad road, and I've tested a lot of cars on it. I wouldn't let anybody that didn't know this car drive it, certainly not down a road like this. You do get into a rhythm with it, and once you're pressing on a little bit, the throttle doesn't become too much of an issue. Unfortunately, although it sounds very nice, this turbocharged engine doesn't have the nicest of characters. It doesn't lust to be revved out like the later Ferrari-derived units that Maserati used. Nor does it have the real low-down savagery that you might expect from a more modern turbocharged power plant. The view out the front is not quite as special as you get in particularly the 550, because you just can't see much of that bonnet. From the outside, this is a beautiful car to look at, especially from the front and really from the rear. I mean, that's its best angle, is from behind. Those boomerang tail lights, which nobody seems to be quite clear on why they went away. Some people say Luca de Montezemolo just didn't like them. Other people say, and I can more readily believe this, that they simply weren't going to pass legislation in the USA. This particular car was never sold in the States, but the later one, the coupe, was. I haven't driven a 4200 or a Spider, so if anybody watching has got one of those and they'd like to see it reviewed on the channel, I'd love to have a go and see how they changed it. The steering I'm getting used to, same with the rest of the controls, but it's just not got the brilliance of the Ferrari human-machine interface. In terms of practicality, this car is no different to the last one that I reviewed, which is to say that the rear seats are actually surprisingly large if you're used to a 911 or an XK, and the boot is surprisingly small, particularly if you're used to something like a more modern BMW 6 Series or even the 550. It's not helped by the fact that the boot only seems to extend to the edge of one side of the car. Real shame that. Oh, that's one of my favourite corners, and this car loves it. When she gets into a groove, she's really happy, but there's this real initial aloofness that you have to push through, and only then will the car start talking to you. Between 0 and 5/10, it's just very vague, very unwilling to cooperate. Then you push through, you get to about 6/7, finally starts to cooperate. An intriguing car. They are, as I mentioned earlier, a very affordable alternative to a Ferrari of the time. Indeed, if you compare this to even the ropiest of 456s, it's still a cheap car. The very best 3200s will command in the UK only about £20,000. Unfortunately, running costs also appear to be in the league of the Ferrari. This car, before it came into its current owner's possession, had the sum total of £7,000 spent on it by Velvis, the supplying dealer. They were very good, and they made sure that the car was in tip-top condition, but these simply aren't cheap cars to maintain, and that really is their biggest weakness, because not only are they expensive to maintain, but people will then want to skimp on the servicing, particularly when the car is so cheap to get into. And that kind of doubles up all the problems that you're going to face. By the time you take it to an independent to have a look at it, you're going to find out that there's an awful lot wrong. Dynamically, it's leagues away from any contemporary Ferrari. Although it can be quite exciting to hustle, it just doesn't have that incredible driver involvement that Maranello's finest cars do. It's capable really of playing all the right notes, just not necessarily in the right order. I wouldn't blame anybody that wanted to buy one, not at all. Looks fantastic, they offer incredible value for money, and they do feel seriously, properly special. But please, don't tell me it's just as good as a Ferrari for less, because it simply put isn't. Shame really. So close to greatness. I think I'll call this car Icarus. This video is probably the end of my career as well, because I've just accidentally driven past a primary school with a car full of cameras. They haven't even been there for the last 3 months, and now I'm probably going to be nicked by Operation U-Tree. However, in the engine's defense, once you are above about 3,000 RPM, response is incredible for a 2-decade-old turbocharged unit. Over a little bump like that and the car wants to go every which way but forwards. Quite disconcerting. There are many words I can use to criticise this car, but slow is not one of them. Unresolved, however, definitely is. This is a tricky and wayward little so-and-so. Anyway, that's my take on the 3200 GT. Close, but no cigar. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye bye.